Right. So we're looking at the effect of an adoption order and what the implications for that is. So number one, right, let me just do this, close this, okay. Right. The order will clarify the claims of contact with the child. It will quantify the rights and responsibilities, right? And it will confer full parental responsibilities and rights to the adoptive parent. It also confers the surname of the adoptive parent on the adoptive child, right? Unless there's something else that is provided for in the order. It does not permit any marriage or sexual intercourse between the child and any other person, which would have been prohibited had the child not been adopted. Right? So you
So before 18, the child can't be married off.
yes, right? And does not have any effects on the rights of the property of a child acquired before adoption. Right. The adopted child must, for all purposes, then be regarded as the child of the adoptive parent, and the adoptive parent is now fully considered the parent of the adopted child. Right. So sometimes it could happen that an order needs to be rescinded. Right. The order to rescind, right, can be made by the child, the parent of the adopted child, or the person who had the guardianship of the child just before adoption, or the adoptive parent of the child. So all three parties can make an order, can approach the court for an application to rescind the order. It must be lodged within 2 years from the date of the adoption. In order to rescind the order, the court needs to consider a few things. Number one, they need to consider whether it's in the best interest of the child, right? If the applicant is a person or parent of the child whose consent was required but not obtained, then it would have to be, it may be rescinded in that case. Or if the court finds out that the adoption order made to the adoptive parent and the parent didn't qualify for the order when the adoption process started. Right? So remember, we gave a whole list of requirements for what the prospective parent would have to comply to. And if it comes out that they didn't meet all that criteria, it could be rescinded. Right? The notice of application must be given to the adoptive parent. It must be given to all the persons who have consented to the adoption. In case there's an intra-country, which we will get to, the central authority of that country, and any other person of the court decides. When an order is rescinded, right, it means that the child is no longer adopted, and all the rights and responsibilities that were given to the adoptive parent are then removed. All right. The court can then, in this case, move the child into different appropriate placement or temporary safe care whilst we wait for it. Okay, so now we're going to go into something which will affect you very often as a social worker, and that is the recording of adoption and birth register. Very often, especially in Africa, the child to be adopted doesn't have a birth certificate, they've been found, they've been abandoned, and there's no way in which we can work through it, and therefore there's a process that comes into this. All right. Before that, though, let's just focus in on the recording of adoptions in the birth register post-adoption. Right. So I want your mind to be thinking of those types of situations, but let's look at post-adoption. Right. After adoption, the parent of the adopted child can apply, right, to record the adoption and the change of the surname in the birth register. And this is a process that you would help parents complete, right? So this is very social worker heavy. The rest of it is very lawyer, court heavy, and quite social worker heavy also. But after the order is done, you sort of kick full in, right? The order that you create, the order that is put together needs to be accompanied by the following documents. Number one, the order of adoption, the birth certificate of the child, the birth registration form, and of course the fee. Now, what happens if a child was born outside of the Republic, right? So they're not registered in South Africa. You can also approach the Director General of Home Affairs to register the birth of the child, right? But this time you need the forms. You need a relevant adoption order as registered by the adoption registrar. So you'd be on the register, sorry. The birth certificate. If there's no birth certificate, you need documentary evidence relating to the birth of a child and certificate signed by the presiding officer of a children's court specifying the age or the estimated age of the child. Right? This is then signed also, the birth registration form is signed by the adoptive parent and on the list, right? To get the child onto that register, to have their surname changed, and to give you the necessary. Let's look at the adoption register. All right, so the adoption register has all the numbers allocated to the records of adoption cases. It contains the details of adopted children, their biological parents, the adoptive parents. It contains the details of the successful claims and appeals against the rescissions of adoption and all the other information in the proceedings. This is monitored by a person appointed by the Director General, and the Clerk of the Children's Court is responsible for keeping all those records. What is the access like? So you cannot disclose, a lot like the Sexual Offenders Act, it cannot be disclosed to any person except once the child reaches the age of 18, they can ask for their records because then they're an adult and they can make a decision. The adoptive parent, right, of an adopted child can also request this after the child has turned 18. The records can be given to the biological parent or previous adoptive parent, right, after the child has turned 18, but only if the adoptive parent and the adoptive child give their consent in writing. The court can also order that such a disclosure be in the best interest of the child or for research. But when it's released for research, there will be no particulars of the, so no identity of the child will be released or of any of the parties, right? Because that would just be for research. However, before you disclose any information containing the adoption register, the person has to undergo, well, may require, but you should require, and you will push for this, and would be required to receive counseling. All right, because it can be a huge life change. Adopted child or adoptive parent is entitled to have access to any medical information concerning the child, the biological parents of the child, right? Only that information is related to the health of the child, right? And then people who are part of the post-adoption agreement would also have access to this information, but generally they would have to apply for it. Now, here's where we get into more of the nitty-gritty details, and then we're going to go back and ask you how you process somebody who wants to find out who their birth parents are. Okay, so number one, during the process of adoption, right, no person may give or receive a gift or any favors or any cash in respect of the adoption of the child, right? Number two, no person can induce a person to give up their child for adoption. So why do you think we have this rule? Let's go, Jackie. Okay. Shakir, why do we have that rule that you cannot give gifts of money to somebody
curb
who's
child
child
trafficking.
trafficked? Yeah, that's
To,
literally child trafficking,
mm,
right? You're buying the child, right?
exactly.
Even if it's gifts or in kind, I'll swap my PlayStation and give you a child. That is
It
not
can also be
acceptable.
a form of slavery.
Yes, exactly that. It would fall under modern slavery and trafficking and slavery. All right. Pedro, would you like to tell us what it implies to induce a person to give up a child for adoption? And what would that look like?
Sorry, just repeat the question.
So no person may induce a person to give up a child for adoption.
Yes, so that would be influencing them negatively.
And how would that look like?
By offering them incentives to do it, like money.
Okay, perfect. So now let's look at when this rule does not apply, right? So it doesn't apply if the child of the mother, the biological mother of a child, is receiving compensation for reasonable medical expenses in connection with the pregnancy, birth, and follow-up treatment.
Sensible.
Yeah, all right. It doesn't count if it is for counseling or for prescribed expenses. Right. It also doesn't count as paying for the child if you're a lawyer, psychologist, or other profession receiving fees for services provided in connection with the adoption. So if you're paying people for their reports, that is not considered under this, right? If it is a fee payable to government, obviously not. It doesn't count as selling the child. Or if it is a child protective organization that's providing a service, if it's an organ of state, or it is somebody prescribed by the court. Okay, so let's quickly stop there and go back. Shakir answered last. So Jackie, you with us?
Seems like Jackie's out of the group.
Okay. Okay, Shakir. Unfortunately, you then have to tell us, right?
Ish.
So, Nick, me, I've come to you and I've said, Shakir, you're a social worker. I want to find out who my birth parents were. How do I do it? So, what do you need to tell me? What information is important for you to relate to me in that situation?
Okay, so from what I can recall,
Mhm.
there has to be consent from the adoptive parents and the adopting parents. The parents that gave them up and the parents that, what you call it, took them. And,
Okay.
and
Does
the
that count if I'm 18?
adopted child. There must be consent.
Okay, so I'm the child. I want to find out. I've turned 18 last week.
I think
I want to find out who my parents were. Sorry, repeat that.
I think still it counts. Or I could be wrong.
Okay, so a child who has
I think
turned 18.
it does count. That means you still need consent at 18.
Okay, you do not need consent
Yeah.
if you've turned 18.
The child is 18.
Yes, the child's consent is obviously needed, but they have access to those
Is it?
records once they turn 18. Right? If they're under 18, then no one has the records to that. Now, let me say, Shakir, so just to clarify, right? I am now a person who wants to find out about, let me find it here quickly. Adoption register. Where is it? Access to register. Okay, can you, as the adoptive parent, find out information from the child's biological parents through the register? And what information are you allowed to have?
Jackie is back.
Hey, Jackie, you're back.
I am sorry.
Okay, so you've missed that
Ask
bit,
her.
so you can also answer this question, right? I have come in now, and I've been adopted. I've come into your office and I say, I want to find out about my biological parents. You're the district social worker, you have the records, supposedly. What do you do? What information
Sorry,
do you have to give me?
how old are you?
I am 17.
Okay. Well, you need consent of your parents at this point
Okay, because
to get
under
any
those,
information.
okay, I turn 18.
Oh, so you're 18 now.
I take out my other ID and show them to.
I'm actually a bit confused by this. Can you do it at 18 without consent? I think you still need consent
That's what Shakir
until
said, and I'm
21.
trying to look up to make sure
Yeah, I
that
wasn't
is
allowed to do
right.
it without the consent of my parents before I was 21.
Shakir also mentioned it. I'm trying to read back to see. No, it says here, the information contained in the adoption register may not be disclosed to any person except an adopted child after the child has reached the age of
Okay. So I wonder
18.
if
Yeah.
that's changed because it was 21 for me.
Yeah, I think it's once you become an adult. Pedro, do you have anything to add in here?
I think we're getting confused with the consent. Consent is required from the parent only if the biological parent or the adoptive parent wants the information. But the
Yes, but
child
not for the
itself will
child.
go to the registrar.
Okay, perfect. Okay, Shakir,
Okay.
does that clarify it for you?
Yeah, it does actually, because it's for me, I'm looking at the emotional aspect of it. I mean, even if you want to know, and you have to take consent, it's going to become a whole chaos in the family. I don't know.
Yeah,
It does.
no,
It does create chaos in the family.
I'm completely agreeing with you. It does make a lot of sense. Right. What is required, Shakir? So you say, okay, you've turned 18, that's perfectly fine. However, there's one more step you need to do before you can have access to this information. What is that?
Jackie hasn't answered this yet.
Oh, sorry, Jackie. What steps? I say I'm 18. I have the
Sorry, there's
right
one more
to
step
it.
that you need before
Yeah.
you can get access to the information.
Yeah. Before you can see who's on the register, there is a step that you need to follow.
I think you would need to. There would need to be a. I'm purely talking from personal experience here, so I'm guessing, but I think there would need to be a meeting with a social worker, that kind of thing, to ensure that your desire for access to the information is from a good place, not because you want to find them and kill them.
Yes. So, and we do that through the counseling process. Okay, so
Yes.
there needs
So
to be counseling. Okay.
yes.
So, although the rules are quite murky at the moment, right, only certain people are allowed to provide an adoption service. Okay, so no person can provide it without the following criteria. Number one, they must be accredited to provide the service. So they must be a child protection organization accredited to provide the service, like Barn Swallows, for example, is a big organization in South Africa that does it. They're accredited to do it. An adoption social worker, right, which means you're a social worker and you've done further training within adoption, or the central authority in the case of country adoptions, right, or a child protective services accredited to do it across the country. However, just because you need these permissions to be accredited and registered to do adoption doesn't mean that your lawyer, your psychologist, the other professions need to also be accredited to provide reports for it. They work independently from it. So how the accreditation works is currently a big discussion. So we're going to skip through that and go into advertising. No person may publish or force to be published any form or by any means an advertisement dealing with the placement or adoption of a specific child. Right?
They need to update this with regards to social media, just saying.
Yeah, yeah. So This is a bit finicky, right? Because how is it actually monitored? You have to check, right? But you cannot publish any advertisement regarding the adoption of a child. There are certain regulations which the court can make. So this is important only because you as a social worker would be advising the parents throughout this process. Even if you're not doing the adoption yourself, you might be advising them as to what to expect and what orders they could receive and what could happen for them. All right. So the important ones are the court can make an order to locate parents to find consent. The order can be to determine the age of the child. It can be for payment of adoption services, right? It can prescribe the requirements that child welfare organizations to comply with, right? And it can also do any other order in respect of the adoption on the condition that it considers it to be in the best interests of the child. Okay, now we're going to get into a more complicated one, inter-country adoption. Okay, so if you throw your mind back right to the beginning, to the first few classes we did, and we spoke about international social work, international regulation, international rules, and the South African puzzle piece that fits into it. Right? I think it must have been the first or the second part. In it, we touched briefly that there are international standards, practices, and laws which guide how we do things and where we fit into the system when more than one country is involved. All right, these are called conventions. And the one that is important here is the Hague Convention. Hague Convention. Right. So let us see. The president, right, enters into the agreement with all the other parties to the Hague Convention, and this guides one of the many things that the Hague Convention does is guide how inter-country adoption works, right? Right. The Hague will refer to a central authority, right? You've heard me speak about central authority. The central authority in South Africa is the Director General of the DSA. In other countries, it would be whoever the final person is that signs off on the adoption. Whoever's that person responsible for that department, they would be the central authority. The central authority can delegate systems out, rules out, and duties out to people below it, which is why you have the DSD. Then under it, you have district social workers, and you have all the way down to auxiliary social workers, because all of that is passing on of the responsibilities and delegating responsibilities to different people. All right. The central authority can also accredit organizations to provide this service. The central authority can enter into a working agreement, right, to provide inter-country adoption, right? And why, if you think about it, why is it such a rule-driven element of adoption? Why is it very important that there is a lot of rules in this? Let's see, Pedro.
Sorry, what's the question again?
So the Hague Convention has a ton of rules in terms of all countries have to agree to certain things and certain procedures in order to make the inter-country adoption process the thing. Why are all these rules necessary? What are they trying to avoid?
I think they're trying to avoid inter-country trafficking and also child abductions to another country.
That's exactly it. All right. The Hague Convention, fun fact, is also where you get your apostle stamp from. Right. So under the Hague, you have a set of rules. And one is the child trafficking, there's divorce rules, there's child abduction, there's access to justice, there's protection of adults, maintenance for children, and then finally also how inter-country adoption We're not going to spend a lot more time on this because this is like 3 steps up from where you would, right? So after you become a social worker, you would still study to specialize in adoption. After that, you'd have to register, do specific exams to do in the country adoption and follow those. So we're not going to spend a lot of time there because that would just be me speaking into the void. Let's get into the fun facts of child abduction. Okay, perfect. Child abduction, like I said earlier, is covered in the Hague Convention, right, on international child. The Hague Convention on International Child Abduction, right? And your understanding in this chapter is to try and work out what those regulations are, what is child abduction, what are the rules related to it, and also to combat parental child abduction. Shakir, what is parental child abduction?
Okay, at the top of my head, when parents are divorced, then the other parent wants to take the child.
Okay, perfect. Peter, do you need to add something to it?
No, I think that summarizes it.
Okay, so under this convention, and I mean, we're going to get into all the nitty-gritties a bit later, right? But under this convention, number one, everything goes back to the central authority. The central authority works along with the chief family advocate, right, and the minister of justice, right, to make sure that divorces are run smoothly and that there's certain mediation that takes place, etc., etc. We'll do that when we do the Divorcing Act or divorcing rules, right? Then anybody appointed falls under Article 6 of the Convention. The chief family advocate is the person mostly responsible for dealing with this set of rules. He can delegate out to different people, and the courts have specific powers with them, right? So the court can decide whether there's been the wrongful removal of a child or retention of the child. They can request the central authority of another country to provide a report on the domestic circumstances of the child prior to the alleged abduction. They can make an order for the interim protective relief of the child, right, and for the return of the child. Right, but this is a lot of international relations that go. A legal representative must, however, represent the child, right, because this is an international rule and there's lots of other rules that come into place, and a legal representative must represent the child, right, in all applications that will touch on the Hague Convention of International Child Regulation, which ties in very nicely to the trafficking of children, right? So, oh, my voice is going. Right, so the trafficking of children is guided by the UN Protocol to prevent trafficking of children, right? What were we talking about? The abduction of a child is covered by the Hague and the powers of given separately. So, right, we fall under this also, right? We are signatories to this, right? The president signed us into it. And basically, what it says is that no person may traffic a child or allow a child to be trafficked. Right? This is exactly what it says. And then it breaks it down into what exploitation is, right? And how adoption of a child happens illegally and what the implications for that are. Cool. Okay, so no person may knowingly lease or sublease or allow any room, house, or building to be used for the purposes of harboring a child who is the victim of trafficking. They cannot publish, print, broadcast, distribute, right? Anything that alludes to trafficking of the child. So you can't advertise, hi guys, I have a 9-year-old who wants it, right? Who controls this? The internet service provider. So, fun fact, we're going to go into a bit of like criminal studies 101, right? Even if you delete a message, it can be retrieved. Even if you delete a picture, it can be retrieved, right? And this is where this comes from. So your service provider, when you're sending that message, Vodacom, MTN, Vox Telecom, whatever, they are required to flag it and report it to the police. All right. So it puts the duty on your provider to do that.
Sorry, are they then
Hmm.
reading every single message that you send? Because how on earth would they know to flag it?
Every single thing is ready.
Are they doing it, or do they have programs that do it, that
No, they
pick up
probably have
certain
programs.
words?
No one's actually.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, no one's actually.
I
They're probably
think
looking at
I
the
think
nudes everyone is saying.
what happens is they have like certain words which are red tape.
Yes.
So the moment they get a word which represents trafficking, it will send an alert on their side. So they're not necessarily reading every good morning and
Yes, no, exactly. But when
congratulations.
you have the word child, sale, buy now, it might trigger somebody needs to
Yes,
take a look. That's exactly it. All right. Which is why, if you watch some movies, they will often speak about renting puppies or selling puppies because that's not flagged by the system. All right. And that's how many child traffickers get away with it. Actually, they run like real pest wares. But everybody knows it's a child. Yeah, but they have the duty to report it, and Shakira is completely right. But also just assume that anything you send will be retrieved. Good life advice you can use your whole life. Don't send it, don't take a photo of it if you do not want it one day found. Okay.
I think that's how they detect child pornography as well.
Yes. Yeah, they do have, well, yes and no. So child pornography, largely from my understanding, it's been used since I've been working there, is it's a mix now of artificial intelligence, AI that does it also, but also as soon as certain things are flagged, you become followed, right? And then it
Yes.
gets assigned to a person, and that person then just verifies what is happening. And that's why you have such big things that go across countries, because child trafficking isn't a local problem. It's usually a very international problem. There's usually people moved across multiple countries, and all of those services need to be involved. All right. So when it comes about that a child who is the victim of trafficking has been found, certain things according to the rules have to go into place. Number one, the Director General must facilitate the return to the Republic of a child who is a citizen. So they will be, the department has to take the lead in returning the child. The Home Affairs Director General must facilitate and accept the return of the child. They must issue travel documents that may be required, because obviously the child isn't being trafficked with a passport. Well, if they are, they've taken it. All right. Sorry. And at the request of any other state that is party to the same agreement, right, they must verify whether they are in possession of a child that has been trafficked to their country. Right? And that's what all the countries sign. Well, many countries sign it so that we can all share information between ourselves. When a child has been trafficked, the Director General must authorize that an adult at state expense escort the child from the place from which to the place from which the child was trafficked, right? So they'll be given an adult to look after them and to get them back home, right? Only in the case that they have ascertained that the parent doesn't have the means to pay for this. Yeah, so let's do this quickly. If the court has reason to believe that the parent, right, of this child has trafficked the child or allowed the child to be trafficked, the court will suspend parental responsibilities and they place the child in temporary safe care and launch it. An immigration official, a police officer, a social worker, a social service, a nurse, right, all have the duty of reporting a child who is a victim of trafficking. And this is actually more extensive everybody, according to the Children's Act, has that duty of reporting suspicion of that. All right. So let's say you're walking down the road and you discover a ditch, and you go in and it's a whole little house under the ground, like hedgehogs, and there's a trafficked child there. All right. What has to happen? Let me just say this. All
You have
right.
to
Number
report it.
one, you need to report it. It's very sad that we are going through this in such detail, right? But number one, you need to report it. Then the social worker needs to be appointed to run an investigation. They need to report it to the central authority, right? The child would then be considered a legal foreign child. They must be brought to the court and they will be assisted in applying for asylum under the Refugees Act, and then they will also be part of that investigation. All right, but they would remain in the Republic for as long as the court is investigating and working out. So let's say the court has worked it out, and you're actually from Egypt, right? So how do we repatriate it? Number one, right? You can't just send the child back home on the next bus, on the next train, on the next train, right? The Director General has to make sure that there are care arrangements in the country in which the child will be returned. They need to make sure that the safety of the child will be adhered to. And they sort of need to rule out that if there's no possibility the child might be trafficked again, harmed, or even killed upon their return, which is why asylum is first granted and then the rest happens. Okay, perfect. Bit of a dark subject, but we'll get into a lot more detail.
I was gonna ask about this.
Yes.
I was gonna ask about surrogate motherhood.
Oh well.
But anyway,
congratulations to you. We are about
can you
to get.
can you guys
into...
remember Happy Sindani?
No, it sounds very African. I don't pay attention. Tell me more.
A fair blue-eyed boy in Bronx Parade. He was a child of one of the ladies from the locations there. He became very, very famous in about 2000, 2001. But the people
No,
reported that
tell
he
me the
was,
story.
yeah, people reported that he was kidnapped. And that lady was looking after him. But he was actually his mother, like Trevor Noah.
Oh wow. Was this post-apartheid?
Say again?
Was this post-apartheid, or was it like racially
Yeah,
motivated?
2001, 2002, around there.
Oh wow. Okay. And what happened? I need to go look it up. What's it called? Happy Sindani.
Happy Sindani, yeah.
I need to go look this up.
I
What was
remember
the
it because I had a nephew
conclusion?
that looked like him. I used to call him Happy.
That is terrible. That is terrible. Okay, so I don't want us to jump into surrogate motherhood just yet because it's a whole different area of the act. Right. We have two biggies coming up. It's the surrogate motherhood and then the registration of care centers. And how care centers are registered, which is quite a biggie for social work. Surrogate motherhood, not so big in the social work. You won't come across it a lot in terms of the work you'd have to do, and your role will be quite limited, but in terms of registration. Okay, so let's quickly recap what we have done today. Jackie, what international protocols, rules guide the trafficking of a child?
The Hague Convention.
Try again, there's two.
I don't know what the other one is.
Okay, no problem.
Central Authority.
Nope, that central authority is appointed by the Hague. Convention. International
Child Abduction.
Child Abduction. International 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 That is part of the Hague Convention, right? So, right, the Hague Convention does abduction, right? They cover mostly abduction. The UN Protocol for Child Trafficking is the one that we would follow. Okay, so both of these do slightly different things. Why is this important? Because you as a country, you as the president, you sign up your country to an agreement, and the agreement only counts for all the people signing that agreement, right? And the Hague and the UN are two different agreements with many of the same countries, but some not in, some in, who've agreed to the same set of rules. That's why it's quite important, because then you know which countries are covered by it and which aren't. Okay, perfect. Is there any question on anything we have done
Nothing from my side.
today? Okay.
Nope. Good.
Shakir, can any social worker provide services of adoption?
Any social worker, I guess they have to be well versed in the abduction.
Yeah, well, I mean, most social workers do adoption. It's very true, but can they do adoption?
Oh, adoption.
Sorry, did I say
Abduction.
abduction? Sorry, I particularly long.
Yeah, I guess.
No.
No.
Hey, I hear a voice.
No.
Hello, are you alive?
I'm still here.
Wait, it sounded like Sophia.
No.
Oh, sorry, Jackie. You
Jackie.
sounded so much like Sophia in the background that I was like, oh, Sophia's alive. Okay, so let's go back. Can any social worker do it? Right?
Shakir, the answer is no.
No. Sorry, Shakir. I was so confused. I was like, did Sophia just pop up behind Shakir? Like, what on earth has actually happened here?
No,
Okay.
she's knocked out.
Yes, I was about to say, like, for somebody who's sick, you don't sound very sick. But maybe it's the way the audio is coming into. Okay, perfect. So we're going to leave it there. Next week, let me just pause this. No, did I end the recording?